thank you for listening to our webinar, Helping Your Business Reach Net Zero through UK Nature-Based Solutions. Firstly, what gives us credibility to be talking to you this morning? Well, Till Hill is at the forefront of natural capital and nature-based solutions and has been for almost 75 years. We play a pivotal and very crucial role in creating and managing woodlands and forests right across the UK. Till Hill established CarbonStore 2 years ago as its business division, focusing on woodland and peatland carbon. CarbonStore helps woodland creation projects and peatland restoration schemes secure validation and authorization by the Woodland and Peatland Carbon Codes. It also matches companies like yourselves who are looking to buy carbon credits with farmers and landowners. Let me introduce you to the team today. Firstly, I'm Stuart Pearson, Business Development Director for Till Hill. I have enjoyed nearly 40 years as a professional forester and have a wide range of experience and knowledge in forestry. Our two speakers are David McCulloch and Alex MacKinnon from CarbonStore. David is the head of CarbonStore and helped set the business up. This followed 15 years experience in the financial sector, working in London and Japan before opportunities with Till Hill enabled him to return to his rural roots in Dumfries and Galloway. Alex joined CarbonStore as a carbon project manager, having graduated with an honours in environmental science before joining Till Hill through its graduate programme in 2015. Since then, Alex has worked as a forestry manager and in Till Hill's investment team. He joined CarbonStore in early 2021. Together, David and Alex are ideally placed to help you understand the intricacies and complexities of natural capital. A questions and answer section will take place at the end of our presentation, but do feel free to put your questions into the Q&A function on screen at any time, and we'll endeavour to answer them as best we can once we've heard from all our presenters. With that, I'll pass you over to Alex to talk us through the various nature-based carbon standards that are now emerging and how they fulfil the core principles of carbon offsetting as defined by ICROA and the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets core carbon principles.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that okay. So good morning and thank you for joining us today as we discuss the topic of offsetting a company's residual carbon emissions using nature-based solutions in the UK. Just to reiterate, Stuart, if you have any questions during the presentation, please do add them into the Q&A section on the on your screen. So I'm going to start by explaining nature-based solutions and what they are in theory and what they mean in practice. Perhaps the clearest definition comes from the World Wildlife Fund, who describe nature-based solutions as being actions to protect, sustainably manage or restore natural ecosystems that address societal challenges such as climate change, human health, food and water security, and disaster risk reduction, effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. Woodland creation is a very good example of a nature-based solution. By planting trees, you're capturing carbon, which supports the fight against climate change. You're providing space for people to relax and exercise, which improves our health. You are alleviating the flow of rainwater into streams and rivers, which mitigates flood risks. You're also providing a habitat for birds, insects, and animals, which enhances our biodiversity. Of course, there are many other examples of nature-based solutions. For example, restoring and re-wetting damaged peatland, planting hedgerows, rejuvenating degraded salt marshes, or managing and farming our soils in a more environmentally sensitive way. Each of these actions restores, manages, and protects our ecosystems to help address vital challenges which our society faces, such as climate change, the biodiversity crisis, rising water levels, water pollution, and maintaining our mental and physical health. Regulatory standards are gradually being developed that, by quantifying and auditing the benefits of the restoration work, perform two essential functions. Firstly, they issue farmers and landowners with a trusted and reputable unit of natural capital, such as a carbon credit or a biodiversity credit, which, by selling on to business or other organisations, provides the financial incentive necessary to undertake the restoration work. Secondly, by auditing the restoration work and monitoring its subsequent progress, These regulatory standards provide you as the buyer of carbon credits with the reassurance and confidence that your credit represents the avoidance, or in the case of woodland creation, the capture of 1 tonne of carbon dioxide. So far, there are 5 standards which are at various stages of implementation. The UK Salt Marsh Code is currently being developed and piloted by the UK Centre for Hydrology and Ecology. The Sustainable Soils Alliance is currently developing minimum standards to which farm soil carbon codes must adhere. The Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust has just started piloting the Hedgerow Carbon Code. These 3 standards are likely to be implemented over the next 1 to 2 years. The Peatland Code, having been launched in 2015, is more advanced. However, it's the Woodland Carbon Code, having been set up back in 2011, which is the most well established and whose protocols many of the other codes are using as a blueprint for their own procedures. So we're going to concentrate on the Woodland Carbon Code to demonstrate how the UK's carbon standards adhere to the 6 core principles of offsetting. Before that, though, it's important to give you some background information about the Woodland Carbon Code. So currently, the Woodland Carbon Code is the standard for woodland-based voluntary carbon offsetting projects in the UK. It was developed and implemented by DEFRA and the Forestry Commission in 2011 and is backed by UK government. It also enjoys international recognition through its endorsement by ACROA, the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance. It's operated by Scottish Forestry, while the science which underpins its assumptions on captured carbon has been developed by Forest Research, the Forestry Commission's world-renowned silvicultural research arm. These various influences and endorsements mean that the code scores highly in 2 important respects. A, it ensures high standards of woodland creation, maintenance and management across the UK, and David will discuss more about this in his presentation later. It's also a robust, credible and highly respected offset standard which, as I will go on to explain, meets the exacting standards required by sustainability managers seeking to develop reputable and reliable carbon mitigation strategies. There are 6 well-known principles on which offset standards are evaluated. These are detailed in ACROA's code of best practice, and I'm just going to run through them briefly. So, A, is the offset real? Simply put, the emissions removals must have genuinely occurred. B, is the project additional? Carbon finance must be an essential element of the project's economic viability. C, are the removals measurable? For obvious reasons, they must be quantifiable. D, is the emissions removal permanent? The standard must protect the principle of permanence. E, is the offset unique? Projects must be identifiable and their credits properly recorded. And finally, F, is the offset verified? Projects must be independently checked and audited. There is one final criterion outside ACROA's core principles on which to judge an offsetting project. That is, does it support wider ESG objectives? In this respect, contribution towards the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals is a useful benchmark against which to measure a project's additional benefits. Before I explain how the Woodland Carbon Code adheres to each of these principles, I should first address one peculiarity of the carbon credits issued by the Woodland Carbon Code. Due to the natural time taken for trees to biologically sequester carbon, the code actually issues 2 types of units. The first type is called Pending Issuance Unit, or a PIU. These are assigned to a new planting scheme once it's validated, and the volume of PIUs allocated to the project is a result of a detailed but conservative forecast of the sequestration potential of a woodland, given its soil type, species mix, planting process, and management regime, among other factors. PIUs are legally recognised, saleable, and held by the UK Land Carbon Registry. However, because they represent a promise by the woodland owners to sequester 1 tonne of carbon, as opposed to its actual sequestration, companies buying PIUs must say, for example, that they are on the path to carbon neutrality or have plans in place to become carbon neutral. The second type are called Woodland Carbon Units, or WCUs. These are the successors to PIUs, and they represent 1 tonne of actually sequestered carbon. PIUs are converted into WCUs when a scheme is verified by an independent auditor, usually at years 5, 15, 25, 35, and so on, throughout its life. Because WCUs represent a verified tonne of sequestered carbon, companies buying them can use them immediately to offset their emissions and claim immediate reduction. This short description about some of the technicalities associated with the Woodland Carbon Code neatly addresses 3 of the 6 core principles for high quality offsetting projects discussed earlier, namely that they are real, measurable, and verified. In the case of tree planting, testing the reality of the removal is straightforward. Are the trees growing tall and strong? Being visible and tangible carbon sinks, UK-based woodlands can be seen, visited, and enjoyed by everyone across the UK, and due to their long duration, represent lasting memorials to companies' environmental values. As carbon sinks, woodlands remain the only practical technique to directly remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. As such, woodland creation is the only type of offsetting scheme aligned with the Oxford offsetting principle to shift offsetting towards carbon removal, where offsets directly remove carbon from the atmosphere. Secondly, verification of a woodland-based offsetting scheme is central to the Woodland Carbon Code's methodology. All projects operating under the code must be verified within 5 years of planting and thereafter at least every 10 years. This means that all Woodland Carbon Code projects are undergoing regular on-site inspections and surveys by independent auditors. For buyers of PIUs and WCUs, this should offer important reassurance as to the integrity of their carbon credits. Finally, the volume of carbon sequestered by Woodland Carbon Code projects is measurable and accurately quantified. The Woodland Carbon Code calculator estimates the sequestration capacity of a project, given certain variables, such as the species mix, the soil fertility, the management regime, and even the planting technique. The science which underpins these calculations has been drawn from forest research. It's also important to emphasize the conservative nature of the assumptions. A 20% discount is applied to the true assessment to minimize the risk of any overestimation. Moving on to consider how the Woodland Carbon Code respects the other principles of additionality, permanence, and traceability, we could ask ourselves, how does the code prove that the woodland would not have been planted without carbon funding? In practice, the code requires projects to pass 2 tests. First of all, the legal test. Any woodland which must be planted by law cannot be validated under the Woodland Carbon Code. For example, compensatory planting to replace areas of woodland that are felled for development, or woodland creation that results from a planning condition will not be eligible for carbon funding. And secondly, the investment test. The purpose of this test is to demonstrate that over the project duration, without carbon finance, woodland creation is either not the most economically financially attractive option for that area of land, or not economically or financially viable on that land at all. The Woodland Carbon Code's test regarding the financial additionality of its projects is a robust and rigorous test. Indeed, with many industry watchers making strong arguments that the test is denying genuine offsetting projects access to carbon finance, its rigor has arguably gone too far. So the additionality of validated projects really cannot be questioned. Being a form of natural capital, woodlands are inherently susceptible to natural elements such as wind and fire. The Woodland Carbon Code therefore uses a centralised buffer scheme to ensure the carbon has permanently been sequestered and to protect the claims of permanence implicit in its WCUs. Each scheme automatically contributes 20% of all verified WCUs to the buffer, which therefore represents a pool of unclaimed carbon to cover unavoidable potential losses which may occur from projects over time. Finally, all WCUs and PIUs authorised by the Woodland Carbon Code are fully traceable. Each project holds an account with the UK Land Carbon Registry, which is operated by IHS Markit, and maps, grid references, and sequestration details of each project are therefore publicly available. As such, it's possible to physically track all WCUs authorised by the Woodland Carbon Code. I want to briefly highlight the wider benefits of woodland creation in the context of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as it contributes towards 12 of the UN's 17 SDGs. Some benefits, such as improving life below water through riparian planting on riverbanks, life on land via the enhancement of our ecology and biodiversity, and climate change mitigation, are self-evident. It's also well known that woodlands improve our health and well-being. They help cleanse and filter water as it flows into our rivers and lakes. They provide a place for everyone to learn about wildlife, nature, and the living world. Other benefits are less obvious, but equally important. Many woodlands are located in remote rural parts of Scotland or Wales, and so provide vital jobs and opportunities to the communities. The planting, management and maintenance of a woodland therefore bring economic activity to deprived parts of our countryside, and in doing so, help reduce inequalities. Also, the timber generated by productive woodlands, by simultaneously sequestering carbon and growing a vital raw material to build our homes and offices, helps deliver sustainable consumption, along with responsible and sustainable infrastructure, and helps promote sustainable economic growth. So please keep in mind that when purchasing carbon credits generated by UK-based woodlands, you're not only directly creating many positive and enduring co-benefits, you're also buying robust, credible, and authentic carbon credits. With that, I'll hand back to Stuart, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Alex. Natural capital is clearly an exciting space and worth watching very closely. If you have any questions on Alex's presentation, just put them in the Q&A panel and we'll answer them a bit later. Our next speaker is David McCulloch. David focuses on supporting and facilitating the carbon transactions between companies looking to buy and landowners keen to sell the carbon credits. So his presentation will explain the steps to follow when buying carbon credits. He will then conclude with 2 case studies of a peatland restoration project and a woodland carbon project, which are both seeking funding. Over to you, David.
Great, thank you, Stuart. And I'll just get the presentation up. And I hope you can see that clearly. And good morning, and thank you for your time this morning. And before I go any further, just to reiterate what Stuart has just said about the Q&A, and if you do have any questions about the presentation, please just put them in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. So ensuring the credibility of your carbon credit is clearly an important step in selecting the right project with which to implement your net zero strategy. And I hope that Alex's presentation has provided clarity and reassurance on that. However, it is equally important to partner with the right company and the right project when purchasing your carbon credits. And we in CarbonStore have worked very hard to develop a sales process which ensures maximum integrity in the carbon credits that we transact, limiting your costs and also safeguarding your net zero claims, which is especially important when dealing with credits such as PRUs and their associated long-term commitments. So we offer you the widest possible choice of nature-based projects so that your company identifies itself with a project that properly matches your needs. So the robust regulatory protocols, which Alex has just discussed, are especially important for us in CarbonStore. All our woodland creation schemes are registered, regulated and authorised by the Woodland Carbon Code, and our peatland restoration projects are certified by the Peatland Code. And as such, all our projects adhere strongly to ICROA's Code of Best Practice and the Integrity Council on Voluntary Carbon Markets proposed core carbon principles. So, as Stuart mentioned in his introduction, CarbonStore is a business division of Till Hill, which is the UK's leading woodland creation and forestry management company. And with almost 80% of CarbonStore's projects being managed by Till Hill, these strong links are an important bedrock that underpin the quality of our service and, of course, the quality of the resultant woodland. Having been founded in 1948, Till Hill has almost 75 years' experience in designing and planting UK woodlands and safeguarding our wooded landscapes. And nature-based solutions are inherently long-term projects. And Till Hill has an enduring track record of professionalism and high standards, which, as I will show, inevitably influences our own approach in CarbonStore. Till Hill's team of professional forestry managers comprise the largest pool of forestry knowledge and experience of any private sector company in the UK. great skill, experience, and knowledge is needed to design, plant, and manage a woodland so that the right trees are planted in the right place and a healthy, thriving woodland and wildlife habitat emerges. Till Hill also has its own in-house ecology team, able to ensure that the woodlands are designed and planted to maximize their benefits to nature and to our wildlife. And then finally, Till Hill is the only forestry company operating across all parts of Britain, with regional offices stretching from Wales across to Kent and from Devon up to Inverness. So as a result, we have over 85 projects registered with the Woodland and the Peatland Carbon Codes of all types, size, species mix, and in all corners of the British Isles. And often companies are keen for a project to be located close to their offices so that their employees and their customers can easily access and enjoy the woodland's benefits. Many also want the background story to chime with their own activities. For example, companies in the restaurant sector are often keen to work with farmers producing food. Home builders are keen to buy carbon credits from woodlands growing the timber that will then be used to build our houses and homes in the future. And CarbonStore can support these different wishes and requirements of a large variety of different net zero strategies. So when you buy a woodland and peatland carbon credits through CarbonStore, we hope you will find that our prices are very competitive. Our projects are of the highest quality. Your signage and access rights are tailored specifically to your needs, and your legal contracts are more robust. So how are we offering this high quality service? The reason lies in the way that we arrange the sale and the purchase of carbon credits. And firstly, we've improved the way that the market operates. Secondly, as I will explain on the next slide, we have developed the most robust and reliable legal contracts which clearly outline each party's commitments and responsibilities that are associated with each transaction. So to look initially at how we operate differently from our peers. Until recently, the market for woodland carbon credits has been dominated by middlemen or intermediaries. They have bought PRUs at one price from woodland owners and then sold them on at a higher price to companies such as those you are representing today. This means that their profits are largely determined by the markup they achieve between the price which they buy from the woodland owners and the price which they then sell on to companies. And this has had various negative consequences across the market. It means that buyers are paying more than necessary for their PRUs. It means that woodland owners are receiving less than they should be for their PRUs. It also means that the true price of a PRU is being blurred and obscured. And in CarbonStore, we're approaching things differently. We help buyers and sellers directly agree a price, which they're both happy to exchange. And CarbonStore then charges a straightforward and visible percentage-based commission fee for arranging the transaction. We believe that the transparency, the trust, and the certainty of our approach represents a significant improvement in service for every party that's involved in the transaction. So when we were originally setting up CarbonStore and we were investigating the market for woodland carbon credits back in 2019, we recognized that alongside pricing, there were two other vital elements that were essential to developing a constructive and a successful long-term arrangement between environmentally conscientious companies like yourselves and the owners of the woodland or the peatland carbon projects. We concluded that firstly, companies will want to secure certain access and signage rights to the project so that their employees or their customers can visit. And also they will want to maximize the public relations opportunities that are associated with their environmental efforts. Secondly, the nature of woodlands, which take a long time to capture carbon, and the structure of PRUs, whereby landowners are essentially promising to sequester hundreds or thousands of tons of carbon, meant that companies needed strong legal protection to ensure that those promises were delivered upon as far as is reasonably possible. We therefore worked very closely with Burgess Salmon, the leading law firm, to develop what are now considered to be the market's most robust and sophisticated legal contracts, so that both parties, the company and the woodland owner, understood clearly from the outset their obligations, their responsibilities, and also what their rights were. The result is a fair and equitable balance between the two parties, and we've been lucky enough to receive some very positive feedback from our various partners, including from one solicitor of a leading law firm who was advising a woodland owner in a recent carbon transaction, and he generously acknowledged that this is the first robust, credible and serious contract I've seen in the woodland carbon market, and well done. So how do you go about buying PRUs through CarbonStore? The process starts with two very simple questions. How many carbon credits do you want to buy? And what sort of woodland does your company want to identify itself with? And based on your answers to these two questions, we will then draw up a list of potential projects, which we will present to you for further consideration, explaining their background story, the level of access and signage rights, and other relevant points. We will also, at this point, start to discuss prices, as these do vary across different projects. Once you've selected your project, we will negotiate the terms with the landowner. And the landowner in this situation is usually represented by the forestry manager, and we in CarbonStore, meantime, are representing your interests as the buyer. So with the terms and conditions agreed, we will send across the legal contracts for you to then review and sign. And the final step is to transfer the payment and the PRUs, both of which should be straightforward and uncomplicated formalities, so that the PRUs eventually held in your name on the UK Land Carbon Registry. You will also have purchased or secured valuable marketing, signage, access, photography and drone footage rights to the woodland. CarbonStore and Till Hill would gladly support any on-site events you wish to arrange, be they educational tours for local school children or wildlife tours for your clients and your employees. I'd like to close by presenting two different case studies to illustrate the types of nature-based projects with which we can help you engage. The first case study is at the Seven Lochs Wetland Park on the edge of Glasgow, and it's Scotland's largest urban nature park. It will cover almost 20 kilometres squared, and it is based around 7 ancient lochs, the uses of which have interestingly neatly characterised our society's development and civilization over the last 10,000 years. And very appropriately, Glasgow City Council is now restoring the park to provide millions of people across Scotland, and especially in Glasgow, the opportunity to explore and experience our natural world and its heritage. The park will attract exceptional profile and visibility. Over 1.7 million people live within 30 minutes drive of the park in Glasgow. And also because it's situated in a triangle between the M80, the M8 and the M73, it will be easily accessible to a further 2.6 million people who live in Scotland's central belt. So it's got exceptional levels of visibility and profile. The Seven Lochs management team have already identified a number of sites that are suitable for woodland creation. And they also estimate that there are almost 200 hectares, an area equivalent to about 370 football pitches of damaged and degraded peatland that is needing restoration work to dam up drainage channels and re-wet the peat so that you prevent further damage to the peat. It is hoped that the restoration of the peatland and some carefully located planting of new woodlands across the park will also help reinvigorate the local wildlife. Certain rare species, such as otters, great crested newts and waterfowl already live in the park. However, it's important to protect and replenish their numbers. Although the peatland and the woodland carbon projects are in early stages, with pilot projects currently underway to understand the application of carbon funding through the peatland and the woodland carbon codes. Seven Lochs is very keen to secure business partners who, in pursuing their net zero targets, would either help finance their tree planting efforts and or their peatland restoration work. And we're working together with the Seven Lochs wetland parks to secure that corporate financial support. So please do get in touch with me if you would like further details on this. For the time, further details are also available at the Seven Lochs at www.sevenlochs.org. And as I say, please do get in touch with me personally about that. Our second case study is located on the Rothy-Mercus estate on an old farm called Achnahatnich, and it's 5 minutes drive from Aviemore, which is just off the A9 and lies in the heart of the Cairngorms National Park. We have a short video to show you in a moment about the project, but just to explain its basics first. It represents 170 hectare expansion of Scotland's native Caledonian Scots pine forest, which is our ancient pine woods. The project involves no artificial planting, and instead, the area has been fenced off to protect the young trees from any predators such as deer. And the wind is then carrying the seedlings from the neighbouring Scots pine trees, so they then naturally re-establish themselves free from any intervention. Over the next 100 years, the ensuing woodland is expected to capture 17,486 tonnes of carbon, according to the Woodland Carbon Code. And the owner is looking to sell all these carbon credits. And as the video explains, this money will go towards funding environmental improvements across the estate. For the rest of the details, I will let the video speak for itself.
Rothy-Mercus owns and manages a wide diversity of habitats, including 19 square kilometres of woodland, mainly Caledonian pine forest like we're standing in, 55 square kilometres of subarctic montane zone and farmland. Rothy-Mercus lies within the Cairngorms National Park, and we welcome 350,000 visitors here a year. As part of the Woodland Creation Project, we have redeployed 170 hectares of upland hill into native forest. This area is heather moorland and has been heavily grazed by cattle and sheep for many decades. Grazing has stopped young trees from growing naturally, and the livestock have now been removed from the land. Due to its location, we can allow natural processes to take effect. We expect this area to join up and be part of the main Caledonian pine forest. According to the Woodland Carbon Code, 170 hectares is likely to store 17,500 tonnes of carbon over the next 100 years. By receiving third-party funding, we're able to expand the largest remnant part of the Caledonian pine forest in the UK, which is adjacent to this area of new forest creation.
I run a herd of over 350 cattle, comprising of native species and also cross-continentals. We aim to run the farm in a sustainable way, with almost all our forage growing on the farm for our cattle. Through further investment, we will be able to introduce a rotational grazing system. This will allow our cattle to graze our land in the ways that herbivores did naturally. This should improve the performance of the grazing and reduce the amount of fertiliser that we use. We would also like to improve our grassland by introducing more clover into our grass swards, so that all our cattle's requirements can be met through feed only produced on our farm. We are also looking at ways to capture more carbon in the soil that's on the farm. We are a progressive farm that is looking to lead the way in reducing emissions in our farming operation. Carbon funding is a vital part of our plan on the farm. In summary, we have a fantastic opportunity to embrace regenerative agriculture in our farming operation and reduce carbon emissions on our farm.
My role looks after the 350,000 visitors that come to Rothley each year, and it's looking after those visitors in a sustainable way, that they behave responsibly, taking them out on tours and helping them learn about the place. We strive to ensure that everybody that visits Rothley has a high quality visitor experience, and that all the wildlife that call Rothley home is affected minimally. Carbon funding will help to improve the experience of those 350,000 visitors that visit Rothley. Improving the core path networks for all abilities, whether they're walking or cycling on them, ensuring the paths are kept tidy and clean of litter, improving public toilets and improving the amount of public toilets, ensuring that we are available to answer any of the questions that visitors may have, improving the information for visitors and the cultural heritage, as well as signage for visitors, expanding our work with charities such as the Scouts and schools. We have been welcoming corporate partners for over 30 years. Our eco-tourism business is experienced in providing experiences for visitors to enjoy the forest in a sustainable way. We offer a range of different experiences and activities. For visitors looking for a personal experience, we provide a tour in an estate Land Rover discussing the forest, its regeneration, challenges and the cultural history of the forest. We provide a bothy experience where our guests can be greeted in a traditional stone bothy where we provide lunch, a guided walk hosted by one of our rangers, a pony trek through the forest, a quad bike tour through the forest where visitors can ask the guide about the forest and work behind the scenes to safeguard its future. For more active visitors, there are a range of adventure sports on offer, including canoeing, clay fishing shooting. Welcoming guests who are interested in carbon capture is an extension of what we already do. We're experienced in providing a high quality experience for our guests, and we're excited for working with new corporate partners.
Great, thank you for that. And just to recap the details on that project, I hope you can see this final screen. And so it's going to capture 17,486 tonnes of carbon over the next 100 years. It provides exceptional facilities if you would like to host on-site events for your customers or your colleagues. And as I say, please do get in touch with me on my email address at the bottom of the screen if you would like further details about this. With that, I will pass back to Stuart for the Q&A session. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, David. Now for your questions. We will do our best to answer them all. However, if time runs short, we'll come back to you individually with an answer. So Alex and David, if I can ask you both to make sure your videos and mics are turned on, we'll do the Q&As. Just bear with me whilst I call them up. Well, we have a few in today. Right, David, I think this one, so how easy is it on the UK Land Registry to see which co-benefits are associated with a specific project and credits that the project has created?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. So the UK Land Carbon Registry specifically doesn't actually highlight the co-benefits that are associated with the woodland. However, the Woodland Carbon Code has recently made changes to the project design document, which is part of the validation process, to specifically address and explain the co-benefits that are associated specifically with the woodland that's getting validated. And that is a really important element that I know the Woodland Carbon Code is trying to draw out more actively, so that we're not just evaluating a new planting scheme on the number of trees and how quickly and how much carbon it's going to sequester, but also on its additional values of natural capital in a nutshell, really.
Thank you for that. I think here's one I can quickly answer. How do you ensure that woodlands are harvested sustainably? The good thing in the UK is that we have a very closely regulated forestry industry. Both in every country, the forestry authorities have licensing in place for harvesting. Most woodlands will be under a management plan, which sets out harvesting and restocking commitments, and then beyond that there is a license requirements for the felling and restocking of those areas. So you can have absolute confidence that an area of woodland will be managed under very rigorous UK forestry standards, and often are certified through the UK Woodland Assurance Scheme, which is FSC registered and licensed through the regulatory authorities. Right, here's another one. Do companies have to buy a combination of PIUs and WCUs? David?
Yeah, sure. I think, Lucy, in practice, there are actually very few verified WCUs that are available for sale right now. And the reason for that is very simple. The Woodland Carbon Code was set up in 2011. The volume of projects registered with it only gathered momentum from about 2017 onwards. So really, you know, we're only looking at woodlands with a maximum age of 5 years. And at that stage, at the first verification at year 5, you're really not capturing much carbon, and you're not generating too many WCUs. So you can, in theory, buy a combination of PIUs and WCUs. In practice, it's the bulk of your purchase will be PIUs. Hope that helps.
Thank you, David. One for you, Alex. Is GIS could be used to show customers whereabouts their carbon credits purchased are located specifically?
Thanks, Stuart. Yes. So if you go on the UK Land Carbon Registry, you can see specifically where each project is. There's a map on the main page with a little pin that shows you where the project is, and there's also a project map attached, which is a downloadable PDF, which should contain a central grid reference of the project. So you can use that to see, to find your way to the project, even if you wanted to.
Actually, just to add a little bit more to that, Stuart, we've actually just sold carbon credits to a company who's done a really interesting work with the GIS mapping. And if you would like to see an example of that, I can please get in touch, and I'll happily send it over, because they've done it really effectively as well.
Thank you. Here's an interesting one. I think you, David, again. If a company purchases PIUs to cover all of their emissions in a year, can they not claim that they are currently carbon neutral, but are only on the path to being so?
Sorry, would you mind saying that again, Stuart? Sorry.
If a company purchases PIUs to cover all of their emissions in a year, can they not claim that they are currently carbon neutral and not only on the path to being?
Sadly, they can't. And the reason for that is very simple, because the PIUs represent a promise to capture a ton of carbon at some stage down the line. Now, we can tailor your purchase of PIUs to make sure that they're pre-2050 and therefore compliant with the UK's legally required net zero targets. But the carbon hasn't actually been captured to sort of mitigate your residual emissions. So there hasn't actually been an offset. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, David. Here's one I think I can answer. What is meant by no thin-in, clear fell, etc. on the registry list? That refers to the management options being chosen by that particular woodland owner. you can have a no-thin policy, often native broadleaves, montane type of schemes. Rothiemurcus, I would think, would almost certainly have a no-thin plan in place there. But your more commercial, productive woodlands, where timber and productivity is part of the management structure, then you would almost certainly be looking at thinning, considering thinning, and certainly clear fell at the end of the useful life for that timber, particularly coniferous crops, whereby you will have a shorter rotation length. There's here you go, Alex. Is there a different price for conifer woodlands compared to broadleaf woodlands, and does this drive all the does this drive at all the schemes on the ground?
Thanks. There's not specifically a different price for conifer versus broadleaf projects, but there are different prices for different projects with different co-benefits. So where a largely coniferous productive project will be looking to create a sustainable timber that will be used in construction industry and things like that, that may well be in a different location to a more amenity-based broadleaf project. So you might find that there are differences in prices, yes, but it's not as black and white as prices for coniferous versus broadleaf. It's more about the other benefits of the project as well. So a company may be looking to invest specifically in a broadleaf project that's closer to home, and that may have a higher value to them than a coniferous forest, which is in the other end of the country. So there are variations on that, but it's not quite so black and white. And does that drive a difference on the ground? I don't think that is driving a huge difference in the types of projects that are being planted at the moment, no. But it does drive, it does change the prices accordingly.
Thank you for that, Alex. One for you again, David. You seem to be feeling through questions here. So the landowner will commit to the agreed management regime for a set period of time.
Yes, so this is part of the validation process, Annie, and essentially you outline how you're going to manage the woodland over a period of time. The key part within this is if you plan to thin the woodland, you're allocated with fewer PIUs than, and according to the Woodland Carbon Code, the woodland is expected to capture slightly less carbon. So when you're outlining your management plan, you want to give yourself some room for maneuver if sort of you need to adjust your management regime. But at the outset, you basically sort of set out your management regime, and then as much as you possibly can, stick to that over the lifetime of the woodland.
Thank you, David. Here we go. I don't know if David or Alex, whether you want to answer this. How do you prevent an overlap between elms, or whatever becomes of it, and carbon credits to stop both paying for the same thing, e.g. investment in farms to grow more regeneratively? Yeah,
I can take that one. So essentially, you can stack payments from elms and from the Woodland Carbon Code and other schemes on top of each other for one project. So you can have payments coming from several different areas. However, there's no need to sort of stop them overlapping as such. Just trying to find the rest of that question for you.
Sorry, I keep scrolling through the question.
I've got it, thank you, yeah. So they won't both be paying for the same thing, essentially, is what I'm saying. They pay for different aspects of the project, and those payments are stackable, but that's entirely acceptable as part of the scheme, and the project still has to go through the same financial additionality testing as it would otherwise.
Thank you, Alex. And here's another one for you, David. Are there any standards that companies have to meet in terms of reducing their emissions as much as possible before seeking to offset anything left? Or is it possible some businesses are using offsetting as a way of business as usual?
Yeah, no, the Woodland Carbon Code is really strict, and we as a project developer need to implement that rule really rigidly as well. And if you are buying carbon credits through the Woodland Carbon Code, they can only be used to mitigate your residual emissions. And so there's got to be efforts to calculate, well, to reduce wherever possible. And then we're only working to help you on those residual emissions. And the Woodland Carbon Code's website actually has some quite clear rules detailing that as well.
Thank you, Dave. Here's a good one. Are there safeguards in place to ensure tree species are not planted for their rate of carbon sequestration at the sacrifice of biodiversity value? That one again, I think for you, David.
Actually, to be totally honest, there aren't at the moment, but I think there absolutely should be. And that's, I mean, just to give you an insight into the way the validation process works. So we'll gather together all the details about the project, what species have been planted, the management regime that I've mentioned earlier, and that then goes to the auditors at the Soil Association. So that's a first check to sort of say to question whether what is being proposed or what is being done on the ground is actually the best thing for that land. And secondly, it's then also checked by the Woodland Carbon Code. And if you do have any queries on that, it's sensible for a forestry manager to be querying the Woodland Carbon Code before any trees start going in the ground, because I think that's an issue which the Woodland Carbon Code needs to be quite wary of, basically.
Here's one which I think we've had recent experience of. If a business wants to create woodland on land they own, which is under lease, can they get into some sort of agreement with the landowner to do so? David.
Sorry, Stuart, I was...
If a business wants to create woodland on land they own, which is under lease, can they get some sort of agreement with the landowner to do so?
Yes, they certainly can. And we're just arranging the sale of carbon credits, which comes from a long-term third generation tenant farmer in Scotland. And the key part is that the landowner needs to sign the landowner commitment statement, which is part of the Woodland Carbon Code. And as a result, when the lease comes up or when the lease expires, the landowner then agrees to accommodate and adhere to basically the standards that are required by the Woodland Carbon Code, namely to manage the woodland in line with UK forestry standards, namely to inform any future landowners if they were to sell the land on which the woodland is planted, to inform future landowners of those obligations and various others as well. So in a nutshell, yes, you can, but there are certain protocols, I suppose, that you need to follow in order to make sure that it's done properly.
Thank you, Dave. Here's one. How long until an initial credit can be turned into an actual one, so a company can say that credit has contributed to its carbon neutral status? Alex?
Yeah, I can take that one. So it varies by each project. It's faster for coniferous projects where the trees grow faster initially, and it's slightly slower for broadleaf projects where those trees grow slower. Generally, if you imagine the growth cycle of a tree, the first 10 years are relatively slow while the tree is establishing, but after that it's got its roots in the ground and it grows a lot more rapidly. That's where you're reaching the sort of the mean annual increment, the fastest growth stage of a tree, and at that point for a whole project you'll see most of the units converted from PRU to WCU. So that generally, if I had to put a time scale on it, it's generally sort of between years 15 and 30. Before then and after then, it's slightly slower. So after the start of a project, most of the units are transferred to WCUs at around 15 to 30, but then there's also some before and there's also some after.
Thank you, Alex. Just a quick one. Is there a minimum size of woodland required to make it viable, Alex?
I can say that, yeah. There's no technical minimum size requirement. So any size project can enter. There's even a small project calculator, which makes it easier for smaller projects to complete and have their units listed. However, there are obviously costs involved. So we generally find that around sort of the 3 hectare mark is where projects become economically viable or economically attractive for landowners. So there are some below that, and there are a lot. There are obviously a lot above, but generally it's around 3 to sort of 5 hectares is where most become viable. But then it also depends on an individual's positions. If a landowner is particularly keen on having their carbon units registered, then that minimum size may not apply to them so readily. So it can vary, but generally around 3 to 5 hectares.
Thank you,
David.
Yeah, just to add to that, and also just to answer another question about the indicative cost per tonne with the Woodland Carbon Code and the peatland codes, because one of the things to keep in mind when you're designing a woodland is that there are quite a high level of fixed costs associated with both the peatland code and the Woodland Carbon Code. There's the cost of the auditors to validate the projects initially, then the cost of the verification as you go through the woodland and the peatland's lifetime. And then it does take a certain amount of time to gather together the 35-page project design document. And the work that's required for a project of 5 hectares is pretty similar to the work that's required for a project. The work and the costs that are required for a project of 5 hectares are very similar as one for 50 hectares or 100 hectares. So essentially, there's a high level of fixed costs, and the larger your woodland becomes, the lower indicative cost per tonne, I suppose, for your Woodland Carbon Code and your peatland code projects become, essentially.
Thank you, David. I'm conscious that time is moving on. I think we've got one last question. Well, just very quickly, I think we'll finish off with, are we actively seeking land for projects, or is it with landowners to approach CarbonStore? Just a quick one for you, David, just to finish off.
We're actively, I mean, it works both ways. You know, obviously we are very keen to help you. We're going to do it absolutely as well as, I mean, better than anyone in the industry. And so we would love to help you plant. As a company overall, we clearly believe and we're firmly in support of meeting the government's targets to plant 30,000 hectares a year for a whole myriad of reasons, which I hope the presentation has helped understand and explain. But equally, if you're already planting and you would like us to help, please get in touch with CarbonStore as well.
Thank you, David. Well, I hope our presentations today have given you an insight and a better understanding of how the woodland carbon market works for businesses looking to offset their residual carbon emissions. Over the years, Till Hill has planted over 1 billion trees, and CarbonStore is the most credible carbon trading company in the industry. We want you to benefit from our experience. Thank you for listening and for your questions. For those questions we didn't manage to answer, we will come back to you as soon as possible with answers to any that we haven't managed to cover today. And of course, please get in touch with us for further information on anything you've heard today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.